I'm Sleep Aid, your local sleep paralysis demon, and today I wanted to talk about the Webtoon 2025 contest, Webcomic Legends, but there was a specific topic I wanted to discuss. Now, the contest closed earlier today, which means you can no longer enter. Every entry is locked in, and one of the many will be the grand prize winner, but there will be 40 winners in total and 10 per each of the 4 categories. Each category, as you may know, encompasses multiple genres, and that's what I wanted to talk about here today. If we head on over to Overview, we can see the categories: most feels, most epic, most gripping, and most laughs, and each of these is split into subgenres. So we've got romance and drama, action and fantasy, horror, thriller, mystery, supernatural, and comedy slice of life. Now, I entered the most gripping category, and so that is the one that I have been following the most closely. It's also, in my opinion, the most interesting, and allow me to explain why. So as you can see, it has the most subgenres underneath it. Horror and thriller are actually separate genres. They're just listed on the same line for some reason, but basically, most gripping is made up of 4 different genres, whereas each other category only has 2. The thing is, though, a lot of people have been liberally interpreting what these genres actually encompass, and I think there's a reason for this. You see, the most gripping category, up until very recently, had the least amount of entries in it. Now, most laughs is the least entered, but only by a small number, by a small margin. Most gripping is second to least, and for the longest time, it was the least entered. And the thing about that is, because it primarily advertises horror or horror-themed things, there aren't that many horror series on Webtoon. It's very difficult to make a horror comic. It's kind of hard to write horror in general. It's not very easy to do, and to do it in a medium that doesn't include sound is quite challenging. And so I think that what happened is a lot of people assumed that there would be fewer entries in most gripping, and they assumed that correctly. There aren't that many compared to some of the other categories. And so what people did was, I believe, try to stretch the boundaries of some of these genres to fit series under that umbrella so that they could compete with fewer series under the most gripping category, instead of having to fight against the absolute flood of things in the romance category or the action category. And so what I've noticed, as someone who's been reading dozens of entries of the most gripping category, what I've noticed is that many of the entries in this category are not really horror series, are not really thrillers, and aren't really capturing the gripping vibe that I think the judges might be looking for. And now, some of the genres are relatively wide umbrellas, so I can see where people might liberally interpret them to mean whatever they really want them to mean, but allow me to kind of explain. So when you have a category called Most Gripping, the series used as examples for it is a horror thriller series. The judges that are acting as guest judges for the later rounds of the contest are horror thriller authors. It makes kind of a pretty clear picture what the judges, what the staff are actually looking for under this category. And so when you see some of the things that have been snuck under here, it makes it clear that they're not quite in the right place. And what I'm curious about is how much that is going to matter in the long run. But let's go ahead and look at some examples. So right now we're in the most gripping category. We are sorted by likes, and so we're looking at the series under the category that have the most likes out of everything. Now, currently, the number 1 in the category is To Hunt a Vampirus. And if we actually look at this series, it's pretty good. It's entertaining. It's got a good sense of character. There is a little bit of world building going on, and it hints at some backstory, it hints at some drama, it hints at even romance down the line, but it doesn't really do a lot of legwork in the gripping category. And so what's interesting about this one is it is the most liked in the gripping category. It has a lot of views, and the reason it has so much attention is actually because if we pull this person up, we can see that this is an ongoing series under Canvas. It already exists. You can go and read further ahead than where the contest entry gets. But what's interesting about the Canvas entry is it's an action drama. And so for the contest, it's been entered as a supernatural genre. Sorry, it's been entered as a supernatural drama. This is a series about a supernatural hunter who's been tasked with exploring a forest of werewolves looking for a lost boy, and there seems to be a vampire lurking around in the shadows. That's everything that you're given in the first 5 episodes of the contest entry. It spends a lot of time focusing on character building. It spends a lot of time on comedy, on slapstick, on setting up humorous relationships between the cast of main characters. It does not spend a lot of time on dramatic tension. It doesn't really do horror, thriller, crime, or mystery. And the only way that it could be classified as supernatural is just by pointing out that it does involve werewolves and vampires. And so I think that this is clearly an action series, an action, maybe even a romance, but certainly action drama as it's classified on Canvas. I don't think, though, that it should be in the most gripping category just because it has supernatural elements. It really should be under most epic. And I don't say that as an insult to the series. I think it's very good, but I think that by putting it under most gripping, they might actually be hurting their chances of winning. Because even though it has so many likes, if you're trying to sell this as a horror story, it's just not quite going to land. And if it's being judged by horror judges, by editors that are used to dealing with thrillers, they're going to look at it differently than an action judge might. And so it probably should have been in the epic category where action fantasy goes. Same thing could be said about Last Chance. Same thing could be said about, quite a few of these entries, actually. And so, yeah, that's just kind of an observation I made. I think that people are trying to get under gripping because it's a smaller category, but if it's being judged differently, they might actually be hurting themselves in the long run. And here's why I think that that might be the case. So, if you pay attention to the rules, they really do put a lot of emphasis on genre and the understanding of the genre. So if we look at this section here, this is the criteria that the contest is being judged on. We've got 4 different elements. We've got artwork, storytelling, impact and satisfaction, and audience appeal and engagement. Now, what's interesting about these is they each make up a different percentage of the grade. So the first 3 are 20% of the grade. The last one is 40%. But what you'll notice if you read them closely is that 2 out of the 4 of them mention the genre, so impact and satisfaction. A clear, creative, and engaging narrative promise that understands expectations of readers in the selected genre. And then we've got audience appeal and engagement. The potential appeal of the story to the target audience of the genre, which is inclusive of user engagement of the submission. And so that's 60% of the grade being judged on how well your comic fits the genre that it's placed in. And so if we look at some of these entries in most gripping that might not necessarily belong here, they could be severely hurting their grade by being in the wrong category. So another example is this one, Last Chance. This one is, it's more of an action. It's like a shonen style series. It really shouldn't be in most gripping, but it's listed as supernatural because it has supernatural elements. Hollyhock Rust, this is another one. This is actually a love story. I've only read the first 3 episodes. I haven't read the latest 2, but it's actually a love story in the first 3 episodes. It just happens to be dealing with witches and werewolves, and so it's labeled as a supernatural romance. It really should be romance first, though, because the romance is more important than the supernatural, and the elements, the supernatural elements that it does have, are not the kind that would put you in the most gripping category. I think it should be in most feels. But here's the thing, so like I've said, I think people are incentivized to try and shift their genres a little bit, or they think they are anyways, because it's going to be easier to compete in a smaller category. At least that's what I think people are suspecting, because if we look, most gripping has 38 pages of entries, but if we look at most feels, it has 51. That's substantially more competition. If we look at most epic, this is your action series. This one has 67 pages of entries, and so almost double the amount. Now, if you wanted to increase your chances of winning, you might think that, well, I'll go in the category that has fewer people in it, because then my series will stand out more. And maybe that is true, but if your series isn't actually nailing the genre, it might look like you don't know what you're doing, and the judges might look at it differently for that reason. They might look at it and say, well, if this person's trying to write a horror story, they're not really doing it right. Now, you could say Supernatural's kind of a broad umbrella, so don't these series count as supernatural because they have supernatural elements in them? Well, yes, technically they would, but the way that I look at it personally, whether this is correct or not, is I think that each category is actually kind of an average of the genres that it encompasses. And so when I look at most gripping, I think that it's clear by the way that it's advertised and by the way that it's defined that what they're looking for are mostly horror thriller type series. And when they talk about mystery, not everything that's a mystery is horrific or thrilling, and not everything that's supernatural is either. I think that when choosing a category, what you should probably have done is taken an average of the genres. And so if we average horror, thriller, mystery with supernatural, you can use context clues to kind of figure out what exactly they're looking for in that category. And it's largely not love stories, or certainly not the typical love story, shall we say. Whereas a romantic drama of any type should be under most feels. Anything that heavily focuses on action, whether or not there's ghosts in it, should probably be under most epic. And so that's just the way that I look at it. And obviously we won't know until the entries are judged, until we see who wins, but we have to wait and see how much that's going to matter in the long run. I think it'll be really interesting to see, especially for most gripping, if any of these series end up winning that are kind of miscategorized, in my opinion, because if I look at the page of the most liked series in this category, what I find is that I think almost half of them don't really belong here. Hunt of Vampirus is more of an action. Last Chance is more of a shonen. Hollyhock Rust, it's really a love story. If we scroll down a bit, let's see. This BL story it's definitely more focused on the romance element, even though it is horrific. Detective Lennon, very, very good, but it's more of an action fantasy. Neon is... Neon's an interesting one because it is a mystery story, but I don't know, it feels more like a drama. It's hard to categorize, but it's the type of series where it spends all of its time setting up a mystery and building intrigue, but the reality of the matter is that the actual solution to that mystery will determine what genre it should be in. So it could actually be a sci-fi series, it could be a fantasy series, it could be an isekai, it could be almost anything, because until we know what the solution to the mystery is, we can't really be sure what genre it really should be in. But I would say probably more of a drama, though it is very good. It's one of my favorites that I've read so far, but I do question if it belongs in the gripping genre, because as far as mysteries go, it's one that doesn't really have high stakes, and so it doesn't build tension in the same way that you would expect out of the most gripping category. And so that's the type of thing that I just am a little bit concerned about when I read these entries. Keepers Inn, another example. This is a time-traveling romance story, but it seems to be more focused on the romance, and just because there's time travel, therefore it's supernatural, I don't think it fits in gripping for that reason, because again, there's not really a clear set of stakes delivered, and so the tension isn't really there. It's just two people trying to figure out what they're doing as time travelers. It's, I don't know. And I don't point this out to bully any of these creators. I think they've all made fantastic work. There's a reason that they're here on the first page in order by likes. There's a reason that these series have such a positive reception. But I just kind of wonder is the genre that they're in going to negatively impact the grading that they receive? And I think that that's something that people probably should have thought more carefully about. But as I said, we won't really know until we get the short list, until we see who gets chosen as the finalists, who actually wins. We won't know how much that matters. There is one other thing I wanted to talk about. While we're on the topic, or on a similar topic, just kind of discussing the rules and the categories and engagement, though. Usually I don't sort by likes, but it's just kind of a good way to get a scoop of what people are reading in this category. And something that I noticed is there's a handful of series that have a similar situation to this one. So if we look at Last Chance, we'll notice it's got 28,000 views. It has 4,000 likes. So very, very high likes to views ratio. But if you actually read it, we could go to the first episode. It has 400 likes. But if we take a journey on down to the bottom here, you'll notice it doesn't actually have very many comments. It's only got 10, and a lot of them are from the uploader responding to other people commenting on it. And so 400 likes with only 10 comments is a little bit of an anomaly. As we look at Hunt of Vampirus, we've got 1,800 likes on the first episode. If we take a journey to the bottom here, we'll notice it takes a while even to scroll through the comments. There are 153 of them, so that is one comment for almost every 10 likes. That means people are reading this and they have a lot to say about it. If we go back to Last Chance, it's very, very different, whereas it's almost one comment per 100 likes. Very different ratio. And so that kind of begs the question of, are those likes genuine? Are there actual readers leaving those likes, or is there something else going on there? But I bring that up because I think people misinterpret the rules. I think people misunderstand how important the numbers are, and that's something I wanted to talk about. But before I get into that, I just want to say, like, it doesn't actually matter if Last Chance has legit numbers or not, whether or not it's being botted or something of the sort, because it's in black and white. And the entries need to be in full color or they don't qualify. So this can't win the contest at all. So either this person didn't read the rules or they just don't care. But it won't matter in the long run whether the likes are real, because it cannot qualify to win the contest based on the terms as laid out. But anyways, back on the engagement topic. So what I wanted to discuss with that was, a lot of people misunderstand how important the engagement actually is, and I think a lot of people kind of get a little bit too hung up on it. And so obviously Webtoon wants people to be advertising their series, because the more you advertise, the more people you're bringing into the Webtoon ecosystem. They want you to be thinking that engagement is really important, so that you're going out seeking new readers and bringing people to the site. It's free promotion for them, so it benefits them if people think that engagement is really important. But if you pay attention to the way the terms are actually worded in the rules, as we can see here on the grading structure, the judging criteria, audience appeal and engagement, 40% of the grade. So a lot of people see that and they think that what that means is that your numbers determine 40% of your score. But that's not actually what it says when you read the definition. Audience appeal and engagement, the potential appeal of the story to the target audience of genre, which is inclusive of user engagement of the submission. Now, the way that's worded is really important, because you could interpret it a lot of different ways, and what that allows the judges to do is kind of just choose whatever they want. They could interpret this multiple ways. It's so non-specific that they can use it however they want. I kind of see it personally as just a slush fund for extra points for the judges to basically pick and choose what they want and what they don't want. And so the way these rules are worded, in fact, the judging criteria, it kind of gives the participants an idea of what to aim for, but it's so unspecific that I don't think it can be used as a hard and fast grading rubric. I don't think that you can look at this and determine what's going to win, because these are also subjective. But more specifically, the potential appeal of the story to the target audience of genre is the first part of the way they define this. this judgment criteria. And then they go on to say, which is inclusive of user engagement of the submission. So when I read that, personally, the way that I interpret that is, it seems like they're using user engagement as a further metric of determining how well the series appeals to the audience of this genre. And so it seems like the focus is really on the genre, and they're just using engagement as a means of kind of figuring if that's landing or not. And here's how you could apply that, just as an example. So if we pull up Hunt a Vampirus, you could say, well, this series has a lot of engagement. It has a ton of likes, a ton of views, a ton of comments. But if you read a lot of the comments, they're not talking about being most gripped. They're not talking about horror. They're not talking about thriller. They're celebrating the series, but there's a lot of talk about how hot the characters are, how funny it is, potential romances, and just things like that. And so what that's doing is actually kind of sending the wrong message. So if you were to judge very harshly, you could say, well, the engagement to the series seems to, even though the series is very engaging, it's engaging the wrong audience. You don't really want in a horror series for all the comments to be talking about romance. That implies that you're not hitting the target audience. And so even though engagement is good, it might be sending the wrong message. And I'm not saying that that's what's going on here with this rule. I'm just saying that that's one way that you could interpret it. And so that's just an example of how it's very loosely defined. And so I think a lot of people, they see engagement and they just think that a series has to have high numbers to win. They think that, everything that's got the most likes, those are going to win. But just looking at the way that the judging criteria is defined kind of implies that that's not necessarily the case. And so that's just something I kind of wanted to bring up. But just also to further kind of bring that point home, if we look at previous contests, you'll also find quite often that many of the winners and finalists are series that didn't actually have a lot of engagement, that didn't have that many views or that many likes or that many follows. And so if you did enter and you're not here on this top page, don't think just because you don't have a lot of likes that you won't qualify. It really doesn't work that way. Anyways, yeah, that was just something I wanted to discuss, though, was particularly the concept of genre, and if some of these series are in the wrong genre, and I wanted to speculate on whether or not that would matter in the long run. Because personally, when I look at the way the most gripping category is denoted, the way that it's described on the contest, the way that it's kind of contextualized, I really get the impression that horror thriller is what they're looking for first. And when they allow you to enter supernatural or crime and mystery, they're looking for stuff that's adjacent to horror and thriller. So just because your series has ghosts in it doesn't necessarily mean it should be in supernatural. I think that there's a particular type of vibe that they're going for with gripping. It can't really be defined easily, but you kind of know what it is when you see it. And so there are a lot of series in here that really nail it. I think Instinto is a good example of that. It does a great job of building up atmosphere, of building up characters and things that are horrific and creating dramatic tension with high stakes. I think that's kind of what they're looking for, is high stakes, especially in the thriller category. But yeah, so many of those entries that really nail the genre are just not getting as much attention, and they're only pushed further down the list by things like these up here at the top that are potentially in the wrong place. But yeah, that doesn't go for everything on the front page, like Hunt for Eden, for example. Although I get the impression this is more of an adventure story that just happens to have horror elements. It does do a great job of nailing the horror genre in its first 3 episodes for the entry. And there are a few examples of that as well, series that seem like they might not actually be horror series, but just kind of lean into that for their intro. Notes on a Changeling is a good example of that, whereas this deals with horrific topics, but it establishes a mystery. It's about a girl who is being stalked by a ghost that only she can see, and this is basically ruining her life. The thing is, what it doesn't answer in the first 3 episodes is, what is this ghost monster? Why is it stalking her? Is it friendly? Is it malicious? We don't actually know any of that, and so the answer to those questions could actually change the genre. If it turns out to be friendly, or maybe it's just infatuated with her, like, it could be the spirit of a dead loved one, it could be anything. The answer to what it actually is and why it's following her could change the genre from horror, and so that's one of those things where I think there's implications that it might not be a horror series, or maybe it is. It could be that it's just a big misunderstanding and this might be a Trojan horse. But nevertheless, this entry is very good. I think it has good odds of placing. But that is, yeah, something I've just been seeing a lot, because, like I said, I've been reading dozens of these in the most gripping category. It's a very fascinating genre. It's a very fascinating category of genres because it's such a wide umbrella, but there are just a lot of things that have caught my eye as probably out of place. But anyway, to make an early prediction, again, the contest closed earlier today, and so we won't know for another month who's actually been chosen for the second round for the 40 finalists of the entire thing. But to make an early prediction, out of the few dozen entries I've read in the most gripping category, I think actually on page 2 is where we'll find our most likely winner. And my money is on, proverbially speaking, of course, my proverbial money is hypothetically on React. I think out of everything I've read, this one is the most complete. It sets a perfect stage. It introduces all of the key elements, all the key characters. It does a good job of building drama and tension and stakes, and it ends on an excellent hook. So I would imagine this one will do very well, but so far it would be my pick for first place in most gripping. I think it nails the genre perfectly. It just does a very good job all around, and so that's kind of what I'm thinking will happen, although I only came to that conclusion after the 3rd episode of React. Before the 3rd episode had been posted, I was most closely looking at this one, Blood is Thicker. This is another one that just does an excellent job of nailing the genre, and I think that that's what's going to matter in the long run. It builds tension so well, it sets such an ambience, it has atmosphere like no other series has, and so I think that that is going to go a long way. I fully expect both of these to be in the top 10, but I think that React will probably rank a little bit higher. But anyway, yeah, that's about all I think I've got to say on the topic. I suppose now would be a good time to shill my own ridiculous entry, even though I have mixed amounts of confidence. I was a lot more confident before I finished it, and then I barely made the deadline, and so I had to cut a lot of unfortunate corners, and there's so many things in hindsight that I would like to do better, but, well, we're stuck with what we've got. But here's mine, actually. It is A Dumpster Girl, as you can see. It is a horror thriller about a girl that gets thrown into a dumpster. And the girl that threw her in the dumpster is now being haunted by a ghost. That's more or less the premise. It's pretty straightforward. You might enjoy it, you might not, but I would definitely recommend checking it out if you're into ghost stories and things that are horror or thriller adjacent. Anyways, that's all I've got to say. I really wanted to do videos like this before the contest ended to kind of drum up intrigue and build more interest and just kind of discuss the topic while it was hot, but I was honestly so busy trying to finish my entry I didn't have time to do anything else, and so I think over the coming days I'll be checking out more entries, perhaps doing some live readings, I don't know. But I've got a couple of other topics relating to this contest that I would like to discuss, so we'll probably see some more of that soon. But that's all I've got for now, and I will see you in your nightmares.